Hey everyone, my name's Russ. We'll give it a minute or two for people just to come in before we kick off. While we're waiting, if you want to share a quick hi in the chat to everyone, maybe just your name and where you're from, like what city or country or time zone. Love to hear from you.
Seeing some familiar names in the chat, in the participants. Hi.
Okay, we might kick off then. Thanks everyone for waiting. Well, hello. Welcome to Intopia's webinar series. As you've probably already known from the invite, today we're going to be talking about an introduction to WCAG. So my name's Russ and I'll be helping Julie feed her questions, etc. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. And that includes, for Julie, who's in Perth, the Wodja people, and for myself in Cammeray, New South Wales, the Cammeraygal people. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and we acknowledge and respect Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people who are participating in this webinar. We'd also like to acknowledge that the captioning is being provided by AI Media. And the last little bit of housekeeping, in the near future, recordings from this session will be available on our Intopia YouTube channel, and we'll notify you via a range of different meetings, including Twitter. Another one is that, just before we kick off, is today's session is going to be quite interactive. So Julie will be answering questions not only at the end, but during the session. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time. The one thing I would say though is, a lot of people think that chat is a great place to ask questions, but it's sometimes very hard to keep an eye on. So we'd like to ask, if you could, on the bottom of your screen, or if you're listening for it, you should see or hear something called a QA function. That's where we'd like to ask you questions, and I'll be helping feeding them to Julie. So I think that's about it for housekeeping. So let's talk about Julie, because I love talking about Julie. Julie Grundy, amazing member of the Intopia team. So Julie is an accessibility expert with more than 15 years experience in front-end development, and particularly in the health and education sectors. She believes in a democratic web, and one of her key goals is to help organizations make their websites inclusive for everyone, which is a great goal for everyone. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to the amazing Julie, who will help explain the mysteries of ATAG to us all. Over to you, Julie.
Hi, sorry, I just got distracted because I opened up the Q&A and saw that perhaps the chat might be disabled. So if Crispy or Russ, if you want to have a look at that, and I will start talking about ATAG. So ATAG is a standard that is part of the Web Accessibility Initiative of W3C, but it's not very well known. Very few people have heard of it, generally only people in accessibility circles. And when recently we at Intopia had a few audits, or people asked us to do ATAG audits, and it was really hard to find materials on this. There's not a lot of information out there. So I thought, since I had been knee deep in ATAG, I would share with everybody what I've learned about it, and maybe try and raise some awareness of what it is as a standard and who should be using it. And then hopefully people will start investigating it and bringing up more details, more blog posts, more information about ATAG overall. So let's kick off. So what is ATAG? ATAG stands for the Authoring Tools Accessibility Guidelines. I'm going to assume that people who have showed up for this already know what accessibility guidelines are, but I will put in the chat what a link to the guidelines. That's not the guidelines. I'm going to put this link in the chat. Let's, I hope everyone gets that. So this is the ATAG standard. If you haven't been aware of it previously. It does raise the question. We know what accessibility guidelines are. What are authoring tools? And what does this apply to? So an authoring tool, as defined by the Authoring Tools Accessibility Guidelines, is a website, could be an app, could be software, which is used to make content for the web. Now, this might be something like a content management system, could be social media, could be a coding environment, an IDE. Pretty much anything that can be, if you are making something which can be rendered by a browser, so HTML, PDF, EPUB, SVG. And when I first started reading the ATAG guidelines, I didn't actually realize that it was purely intended for making content for the web. I thought it was just content creation generally. And so I actually sort of started asking questions, what does this apply to? Because if I make a video on TikTok, I'm using an app to create content, which may then be later viewed on the web. TikTok does have a website that you can send links to. Same if I'm making a Word document, it's not really a web document, but nowadays you have Microsoft Online and Google Docs. So a lot of things end up online. Another thing that I thought about was making games and game tool software. I would think that that wouldn't be covered by ATAG, but what if you were making a level for a game that is going to run in a browser? It's quite a fuzzy boundary, in my opinion, and I think it's only going to, over time, get more fuzzy. So since ultimately everything ends up online, in the same way that we sometimes apply WCAG to mobile apps, and have included in version 2.1 of WCAG, we've started including more mobile-based situations. I'm a little bit inclined to apply ATAG to any content creation tool. The specifics of some of the criteria are about web content, but I'm not actually seeing any reason why anyone making software that creates content shouldn't be looking at ATAG and at least considering what those options are. ATAG as a standard has two goals. It wants to make these content creation tools, firstly, easier to use by people with disabilities. So we're talking about making the interface and the tool itself accessible and easy to use, but also more likely for people using that tool to create accessible content, to help prevent accessibility problems by supporting the creators and the authors to do the right thing. So this is, like, to me, this is a really exciting thing. It is in addition to WCAG. It is not instead of WCAG. The first criteria is any webby stuff in your tool needs to comply to WCAG. So you're not getting away with not complying with WCAG if you choose ATAG. It is on top of WCAG. But then that kind of raises the question of, well, why use it then? Why not just stick with WCAG? And the reason for that is because ATAG is very specifically targeted towards applications for content creation. These have more complex needs than a brochure website full of content or an e-commerce site. You tend to have more complex navigation. You have a vast number of features and settings. And so making those accessible and supporting people in making accessible content has more specific needs. WCAG is great for getting yourself to a baseline level of accessibility, but it's not really sharing with you what would actually make this tool great and useful. So it does add to that. But also, more importantly, from my point of view, is that people with disabilities should be creating the web alongside everybody else. I'm an old school self-taught web developer, so I don't like too much corporate control. I like the idea that everybody should be building the web, not just a few big social media companies. And then if that's true, then we should be making the web of the future. It needs to be diverse and inclusive. And the best way to make sure that it is diverse and inclusive is to make sure that the people building it are diverse, that we have a variety of experiences and skill sets to make sure that what's produced reflects their needs and interests. And also the last reason that I think ATAG is really important is because there's more to life than paying bills and getting an education and doing online shopping. Content creation means that we can do art and entertainment and silly jokes. I want the future of the web to include all of those things. And so I am like, yeah, we need to bring accessibility to content creation, not just content consumption. So now that I've given you that little dose of techno-optimism, do we have any questions so far?
I think you forgot the most important thing, which is memes. Isn't the future of the web just memes?
Yes. Like if people with disabilities can't create memes, then that might be one of the worst examples of bigotry. Like this is, I want memes from people with disability.
Well, Andrew has made a comment in here. So Andrew is throwing down some fighting words here.
Yes.
I think ATAG clearly applies to Word as Word
Oh,
has a save as a web page HTML.
There
so what
we
do you think
go.
about that, Julie?
Yes.
Fighting words, or do you agree with him?
No, I would completely agree with you, Andrew, as I usually do. Web3 NFT. I am skeptical, but if Web3 and NFTs want to be accessible, Alfred, I am not going to stand in their way. But yeah, if your tool saves out to HTML, yeah, ATAG applies. We need to make sure that it's saving out accessible HTML. So yeah, let's.
There's no other questions in QA, so back to you.
Alrighty. So I'm going to talk about the similarities to WCAG so that we can sort of leverage our experience with WCAG to help us get to know ATAG. It has a nearly identical structure, and I'll talk about the difference about that in a minute. It has the 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. It also has a kind of semi-level called WCAG, but then that just translates to whichever WCAG level is appropriate, which would be A, AA, or AAA. So sure. It also is broken up into principles, guidelines, and success criteria in the way that you're familiar with. And so you can definitely find your way and navigate your way around. If you open up the link that I shared earlier, and Russ, I don't know, we've got more attendees now who might not have had the link in share. So if you wouldn't mind sharing it again.
All good.
Thank you. You'll see that it's that very familiar structure. There's nothing too scary in there, except that it is just as difficult to read as WCAG. It is written by the Web Accessibility Initiative at the W3C. So it's an international committee. And those are 2 words that make writing anything understandable more complex and more complicated. Like a lot of standards and international standards, it is intended for use by lawyers and software developers, well, particularly W3C standards. So it has complex language. It is trying to make fine distinctions. The overview page, and again, I'll chuck that link in chat, helps you kind of sort through what the different parts are, and it gives you the understanding documents and helps you break it down, who should be using it and why. So that does help guide you through that difficulty. Also similar to WCAG, it is full of ambiguity for the same reason that WCAG is full of ambiguity, which is that it's about humans who are messy and weird using technology which changes frequently. So we're always going to have some fuzzy spots where we try and work out, well, does this count? Does this fit our definition of what's needed here? Does this pass or does this fail? We just kind of have to deal with that the same way that we have with WCAG by having long debates and long blog posts about what matters. But I think the important thing is to have a go. That's very Australian of me, but I'm like, yeah, just have a go at ATAG. We'll figure out the fuzzy spots as we go along. Another thing that is similar is that you can do an audit with it. As with WCAG, I've got here, Hide de Vries made a very nice accessibility ATAG auditing tool. And it's just a way of recording as you go. It saves in the browser, so you can do it over time. And this is a pretty good first pass. If you are not sure if ATAG is right for you, or for your product rather, you could have a go at this. And if you end up with a lot of items which are not applicable to you, then maybe ATAG isn't as relevant to your product. If you get a lot of things where it's satisfied or not satisfied, then you might end up sort of saying like, right, we should pay some more attention to this standard and try and incorporate it into our processes. But in my opinion, it's actually the differences from WCAG mean that we might actually be able to use it for something other than just, oh, compliance. Okay, it is, it's just quite different. So I will launch into what the differences from WCAG are. So the ATAG is more about features than code or color or specific details. It's a little bit more big picture. So there are some criteria in there that say you need to make sure that these things are programmatically associated. You need to make sure that there is keyboard access. But it's actually a lot more about, well, what features do you have? Is it possible to do these tasks in this way rather than that way? And so if we think about it that way, we could be using it perhaps as a guide to baseline accessibility features. Now, obviously, co-design with people with disabilities is the gold standard. Usability testing by people with disabilities will let you know about a lot of big picture usability things. And those will let you know specifically to your tool what's needed by people with disabilities. But as a baseline in that all content creation tools should have these features, I think ATAG gives us that really good solid starting point to work from. The other thing that's different from WCAG is that it's not compulsory. There are no laws anywhere that I am aware of that say that ATAG compliance is essential. So anything you do with ATAG, is in fact up to you, which is why also I'm a bit like auditing is nice, but perhaps using it in a more broader sense as a guideline to where we should be aiming for might be a more useful way of looking at it. Nobody's going to come along and say your tool doesn't comply with ATAG, so you're in trouble and we can sue you. But they might say, you know what, your tool, if your tool complied with ATAG, it would be more accessible and you would have more customers with disabilities. The last little difference is that it has a part A and a part B. So all of these principles, guidelines, and success criteria all have an extra identifier. So you'll see people referring to A.1.1.1.1 or B2.3.2. That's just the little notification identifiers of your success criteria. So it took me a little while to get used to that because I'm used to just typing 3 digits and then I'm done. But that's pretty good. So I've sort of given the lay of the land, how it's different from and similar to WCAG. Questions or comments?
Well, no one's got that, but I've got a question in there, which is, the WCAG's all about A, AA, AAA. Is there any sort of reflective similar concepts in ATAG?
Yes, yeah, the A, AA, and AAA exist. And in my opinion, the AAA is very similar to WCAG AAA in that it's kind of your stretch goals. And there's a lot of stuff in there that you think, oh, everyone should do this, but maybe it's quite difficult. And other times it's got, everyone should do this. Why is this a AAA? Like, this should be so easy. We should all incorporate this. So I think as with WCAG, I think it's worth looking at the AAA criteria and seeing which ones are most relevant to your product. And then saying like, yeah, we are going to meet AA, plus a few special AAA that we think are particularly useful for our clients and our customers. So I'm going to dig into now part A and what that's about. So as I said earlier, ATAG has these two goals. And so this is why we have part A and part B, is because the part A is about making sure that the tool itself is accessible to people with disabilities. Is the UI usable and interactive and supporting all of the assistive technologies and settings and preferences that people with disabilities have? So it's like the first thing that we have in part A is if you want your UI to be accessible, you need it to meet all the other relevant accessibility guidelines. So A.1 is a principle, which is basically saying, does your tool meet the relevant accessibility guidelines? So if it's a web tool, it should meet WCAG. If it's software, it should meet the platform guidelines for accessibility. Awesome, good, tick, moving on. From there, part A splits into almost a similar structure to WCAG. It's like, but it's specifically to the editing views. So if your interface as a whole meets WCAG, but what about the editing view? Because then we're going to have some highly specific needs. And so each of the principles from there calls them out. Okay, what needs to be perceivable? What are the things that we know can end up being problems with operability or understandability? And so then each one of those principles has guidelines and criteria addressing those. Rather than go through each of the specific criteria, what I'm going to do is sort of call out some of the ones that I think are in the audits that we've done have been the biggest areas of interest for us. So the first is images and alt text. If your tool lets people put images in, how do we make sure that the editing view has alt text, not just the published final product, but in the editing view? So for an example, I'm using here WordPress, which is my own personal blog. But if I was doing this as a workplace blog, and say my colleague Lauren Hayes, she uses a screen reader. What if she was going to give my content an edit or a review before we published it? And I've put an image in to my blog post. How will she be able to tell if I've chosen an appropriate image? Have I correctly added alt text? If not, she should remind me and say, Julie, what the hell are you doing? I thought you knew better than this. So WordPress does this really well, which is why I picked it as an example. When you add an image, WordPress is like, puts right up the top, alternative text, please. We would like you to add this. And it tells you, like, if you leave this empty, we're going to put in a null alt attribute as well. So it takes care of that for you. So if Lauren was reviewing my blog post, she could go into here and say, yep, there is alternative text for this image, which is describing it. I can get an idea of whether or not this is appropriate for the content. But WordPress has a secondary way that Lauren could do this, is that the actual markup, the way that the tool in the editing view of our blog post, you can use the accessibility tools in DevTools to verify that they have included the alt text that I added. So if I've added alt text, it will show up in the accessibility API, which means that Lauren doesn't have to go into that image editing area. She can just navigate through here. The interesting thing to me here that I hadn't realized before is that when you're in editing view, WordPress puts the image and its caption as a definition list. But when it gets published, it transforms that to a figure and a caption, which is quite nice. I was like, why is it showing up as a definition list? But you can sort of see it's programmatically available before we publish, not just after we publish. So another issue that comes up frequently is keyboard access. And WCAG requires us to say, well, everything can be done with the keyboard. You can focus on it and you can use it. The complexity of content creation tools, though, means that navigation becomes way, way harder. So for example, this is a screen grab of VS Code with a HTML page or a bunch of HTML pages open in it. I've got a sidebar with all the files that belong to this project, and I've got a terminal window open. So there's a lot going on in here. There are a lot of menus and just a little bit of content showing in my editing view. If I used Microsoft Insights to trace a tab path through this navigation. So this is my keyboard navigation, and you can see we go from 1 to 15 before we even reach the terminal. We go up through the top level menu, file edit. We've got our sidebar menu to change the views. We've got our list of files, which is open. Then we've got other views, which we can open. Then we've got all of the files, HTML files that I have open, and then the actual HTML itself. And then we run into a problem, because once I get into that editing view and I start hitting the tab key, instead of navigating from one chunk of the interface to another, tab means something in HTML. It means that I am adding in tab spaces to organize my code. So you can see the complexity here, and this is why ATAG is needed, because it goes beyond the simplicity of WCAG, which is just, can you use it with a keyboard? ATAG asks us, can you do it efficiently? Is it easy? VS Code does bring a lot of really great keyboard methods of getting through this complexity. The first thing is that it has 1,000,001 keyboard shortcuts, and it allows you to edit those to ones that you prefer if they don't suit you, which is lovely. So you can have a lot of control over your keyboard shortcuts and sort of jump around the interface as much as you like. The other thing that it has, which is particularly relevant to code, is it has a minimap feature. And what that is it sort of summarizes or makes a little map of your page. So this page is quite long. It has a lot of content. I can navigate with the keyboard in the HTML one line at a time. Tab, 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 arrow, 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 arrow. But the mini map allows me to jump across and actually go, oh, you know what, just get back to the beginning of the file. Just get back to the end of the file, which is where it has the function that I particularly want to work on today. And it has a lot of options to allow you to customize that. So this is, again, one of these things where ATAG goes beyond just, can you do it? It's like, are there any features you could add that would make it easier for people? Now, obviously, a mini map is mostly relevant to coding. If you were making, say, a Word doc, you might use the navigation pane would be the kind of thing. If it was a web page, you might use accordions or tab panels or something like that to sort of add that structure to make it easier to navigate with. The other thing that comes up in part A is that all of the changes and things that you do while you're making your content need to be reversible. Now, this is good for everybody, as we often find with accessibility. What's good for people with disabilities is really good for other people as well. But specifically, undoing changes is really, really important for accessibility, because people using assistive technology sort of have that extra layer of tech between them and the tool, the content tool. And so it's easier to make mistakes. We want to make it easier to recover from mistakes. So undo is the pretty standard thing. Letting people undo easily is wonderful. So this is a screen grab of Figma, and I've just showed the standard. In your edit menu, there's an undo control and a redo control, and they have keyboard shortcuts, which we love. Like a lot of graphic software, Figma uses a lot of keyboard control toggles for settings as well. So if you turn on a setting with a keyboard shortcut, you can turn it off again using the same setting. So it's like really fast and intuitive. So that's really wonderful. But we don't have to just limit ourselves to that. We can add, again, ATAG is very much encouraging you to go beyond the bare minimum. We can have like a status update. You've deleted a file. Would you like to undo it? Did you accidentally do that and you would like to maybe not? Rather than making you search through a menu, it's like, I'm just going to put this option right here for you just in case. That's really nice. Another one is that if the change that they're making is destructive or very difficult or you can't recover from it, give people a confirmation. Let people have a chance to sort of go, right, what does this mean? What am I doing? Okay, actually, maybe I didn't want that, and back out. Or, yep, that is in fact what I want. Let's go. So having confirmation messages is really, really lovely. The last part of part A is documentation. Documentation is part of accessibility. If we're going to all the trouble of making these accessible UIs and our accessible editing views, and we've got our mini map or our ability to undo things quickly or customize keyboard shortcuts, we should let people know about that. So document everything, all of those features. Make sure that people can find them easily and you make use of them. Because if people don't know it's accessible, they may just assume, oh, this isn't accessible. Most things aren't accessible. I won't try. If you've gone to the trouble of doing this, brag about it a little bit and make sure you document it. The example here I've got is from Figma. They have a lot of shortcuts and quick actions as well. And they haven't set this aside to, here is our accessibility documentation. They've just put it in with the getting started. And they've said, to save you from any unnecessary clicking or scrolling, we've put in some keyboard shortcuts. That's again, not limiting that to people who are like, yes, I have a disability and I require accessibility support, because not everybody thinks of themselves that way, even if they would really benefit from accessibility support. So we just kind of remove that and we just sort of say, look, anybody who wants to reduce the amount of keyboard work can use these, and here's how, and here's a documentation. So that's part A. Just checking how we're going for time. Yes, good. So let's move on to part B, unless there's any questions, Russ.
Yeah, there's one in the Q&A. I might just read out to you.
Yeah,
this is from Karen. Thank you, Karen. I write easy read and easy English and use tables for formatting. The biggest problem I've come across is that I can't work out how to make the reading order read across each row. No matter what I do, it defaults to reading my column. The images are integral for context for the text, yet corresponding images and text are read at completely different times rather than one after another. I've tried updating the reading order.
Yeah, that is a big problem. Yeah. What tool are you using, Karen? Are you able to come off mic or put it in chat?
It'd have to be put in chat. I don't think you can share sound.
Scrolling over to the chat. Hello. In PDF. Yes. Oh, this is a huge thing. Reading order is a big deal because as Michael at our work found out, there are 3 document object models in PDF. And so if you do one and then change something in another, the change you made to your reading order isn't going to stick. So you need to actually get this in the right order and make changing. I think Michael will be able to perhaps give more advice if he's in here. If he's not, maybe someone else can check his notes. My understanding is that reading order should be the last thing that you fix, because that way it can't be overwritten by any other changes you make. And if you make any other changes after that, if you realize, oh, I've got to fix a typo, go and check that reading order again. PDF and particularly Adobe Acrobat do not make it easy. It's not your lack of skill, it's that it is in fact actually really difficult problem that you're facing there. So yes, we would, and I think we've already dubbed Michael in for some kind of blog post or how to for this, because when we learned it, we were like, wow, that explains so much about why this is so hard. You're not alone, Karen, is all I can say. So we will definitely get into this. But this is the kind of thing that if Adobe were to maybe think a little bit more about ATAG, that would really help them address this, because people are trying to do the right thing. And that, oh, I'm going to use that as a segue, Karen. Part B is absolutely about making it easy to do the right thing. You're a knowledgeable user. You want to have the right reading order. Adobe is making it hard for you. We want to make it easy. So part B is all about supporting all users to make more accessible content, to prevent accessibility problems before things even get published, rather than publishing and then having someone audit it and go, oh, well, that's not very accessible. And then you have to go back and remake it. Part B is about saying, what if we help people make things more accessible before they hit publish? So any automated content should be accessible without the author even needing to know. Okay, so as an example of this, if I'm using Confluence and I'm writing up some documentation, because I love my documentation for my team, and I use an information panel, I can't choose the color, or I can choose an icon, but I can't add alt text for the icon. That's already provided for me. So that's what we call pre-authored content in ATAG land. That pre-authored content, it is the responsibility of the person building the tool to make sure that that is accessible, because the author doesn't have control over that, and may not even be aware of the need for it to be accessible. So anything that you are automatically providing for a user, make sure that that's accessible. We also want to make it possible so that people who know about accessibility can do the right thing. I'm pretty sure we've all had experiences where we're trying to make a document or build a web page or something, maybe use a content management system. And we're like, oh, I really want to choose a heading level. And all we've got is the choice between heading, plain text. Very annoying. Or how can I add alt text to this? So Twitter in particular for a long time wouldn't let you add alt text to images. They've now come so far, and like they've really come ahead in leaps and bounds on that. But for a while there, you couldn't add alt text to images on Twitter, even if you knew what alt text was and why it was necessary and wanted to do it. Your option was to add another tweet describing and say, here's some alternative text for the image that I put in my previous thing. Not great, could be better. So Confluence, again, as an example, I'm allowed to choose whatever heading level I know is appropriate. So that means that I'm not blocked from doing the right thing. I can create a nice heading structure for my page. The types of things that you would do to make it possible for users to make accessible things depends very much on what type of content is being made. So obviously, if you're allowing people to add images, you need to provide, or multimedia, you want to provide a way for people to add alternative text or captions and transcripts. If you're not doing that in the first place, if you're a code environment, then we need to think more about, well, how do we programmatically associate the right HTML elements to other HTML elements? Can we make that easier for the user, for someone who knows what they're doing to do the right thing? We don't want to block anybody. If it's a text or a documentation thing, we want to think about structure and semantics of the elements as well, and letting people control that. And again, we come back to colors. Can people choose colors? In which case, are there accessible combinations possible? Or have you picked colors based on it being pretty and not based on whether or not your default text color is going to look okay on it? These are all the considerations that we have. We also want to make it easy for people who don't know anything about accessibility. We want to sort of gently nudge them in the direction of doing the right thing. This is where I think WordPress is really great. Going back to my example of putting an image in a blog post, when I add it, it invites me to add alternative text, but it also has a link, learn how to describe the purpose of the image, and an instruction, leave it empty. If the image is purely decorative, just leave it empty and we'll take care of it from there. So somebody who had never heard of alternative text before, doesn't know what it's for, is actually given a jumping off point. And you can't force people to click that link and to learn about it. You can't stop people from typing in absolute nonsense into their alternative text, but you can at least encourage people to learn about it. And when people start seeing it everywhere, they're like, oh, what is this alternative text about? Why would I need to know about that? And encourage people and nudge them along the path to more accessibility. The other thing that WordPress does that I quite like is, because there are, again, we've got pre-authored content, and part B of ATAG is very concerned with pre-authored content. If you are providing themes or layouts, or here have an image library or an audio library, We want to make sure that at least some of that is accessible. In an ideal world, all of it would be accessible, but as you all know, we do not live in an ideal world. But what WordPress does is for its themes library, it actually has a tag called accessibility ready. So if you want an accessible theme, you can say, yeah, just show me the accessible themes, thank you. And I like that they've called it accessibility ready, because they're like, well, the theme itself doesn't have any accessibility problems. If you start messing with it or putting weird content in it, all bets are off. But that's on the author. WordPress has sort of said, look, here you go. Here's a nice list on a platter of all of the accessible things that you could be using if you wanted. So if you have a library of content or media, and you know that some of it's accessible and some of it isn't, find some way to tag the accessible ones and sort of encourage and support the use of those over the inaccessible options. And ATAG would consider that a pretty good solution to that problem. Part B is also about accessibility checkers. If you can provide one, it helps people find and fix problems before they hit publish. A really good example of this, I actually really like the accessibility checker in PowerPoint. Again, we're sort of like, I think I can convert a PowerPoint to HTML. ATAG applies, sure. It goes through, it gives you like, here are the errors, here are the warnings where it's like, this might be a problem, you should look at it manually and verify. It takes you to the slide with the problem. It offers you a solution for fixing it. It is a really wonderful, I would say that PowerPoint and probably most of the Microsoft Office accessibility checkers meet this part of ATAG really, really well. It's just got so much support for people to do the right thing. Not every tool is going to be able to provide this level. I know some tools just provide a link to an automated checker, something like Axe or something like that. And they sort of say, hey, you should consider this as part of your preparation before publishing. And that's fine too. Like, you can't provide everything. You might not want to provide a full accessibility check. Maybe you just check the parts of it that are relevant to the type of content that you're doing. If you don't have images or multimedia capability in your tool, do you need to check for alternative text and captions? Probably not. But you might want to check for text structure or for programmatic association only. This is, again, where ATAG gets a bit fuzzy. And it's got a lot of ifs and buts in this section. It's like, well, if you do this, then you could maybe provide this feature, but manual's fine. It's very, very suggestion oriented, this part. Another thing that you need to do is make sure that you're not hiding accessibility features. I think sometimes people feel a little bit ashamed, like, oh, we'll put the accessibility options away in a sub menu. We have them, but they're not obvious. That's not great, because it doesn't encourage people to use it. It makes it harder for the people who need them to find them. And it also doesn't encourage any curiosity about, oh, what's this? Should I be using this? We want to make it as equally obvious as the other types of similar features. So for example, again, I'm in PowerPoint here, and the accessibility check that I showed before is presented in with the other pre-publication checks. So you can inspect a document for any hidden properties or information that you might not want to publish to the world. You can also check it for compatibility for versions. And in with those at the equal prominence is an accessibility check. And so it's offering it to you like as a, yeah, this is just a thing that you should do if you want to have a quality PowerPoint, is look at these three particular aspects of your work. So that would be, again, a pass in ATAG. It's got equal prominence with other similar features. So the final part of Part B is documentation again. All of the features that help people make things more accessible need to be documented so that everyone can use them properly. There's no point requiring people to add alternative text if you're not going to tell them what alternative text is, what's good alternative text, what's terrible alternative text, why we've made it required. Document everything. No, making people read documentation is a whole other topic, probably outside of scope of an accessibility webinar. But if it's there, people are capable of doing it, and you've made it possible. So just as an example here, I've got that WordPress theme directory, and they've documented what the meaning is of that accessibility ready tag. And they've told you how you can use it, how you can find it, or they've made a pre-prepared list and sort of said, if that's the only thing you're looking for, go right here. We've made a list for you already. But they've documented the different ways that you could do it and how you would go through your filter to identify those items. So that documentation is again presented as part of a sequence of other similar types of items. It's not pushed off separately to a separate kind of, oh, this is just the accessibility area. It's like, I don't know, you might want to filter the themes for lots of reasons. One of them might be accessibility. Here you go. So for a little more detail into part A and B, I would highly recommend, and I have closed the link, so I'm going to have to open it in the browser and grab the link and paste it into chat. Here we go. Hidde de Vries, who is the developer who made the ATAG evaluation tool that I shared earlier, has written a really nice primer blog post about ATAG, about how it is sort of going through part A and part B in more detail. And I think it's a really, really great example, well worth reading, probably before you dive in to reading the specification itself, just to give yourself a little bit of a warm up. So that's what I've got for now. Are there any questions? Because this is sort of an overview of ATAG. But I have a wealth of information because I spent the last month doing a deep dive into all things ATAG. So please do feel free to just throw random questions about ATAG at me.
Well, see, there's nothing in there. I'd like to ask you a bit more about the reporting tool.
Yes.
Have you used it much, and what's your thoughts on it? It looks kind of amazing, but also any of these tools seem to be, only be able to test so much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I find it easier to use. So that recording tool that Hidde built, I find it much easier for something like ATAG, because it's generally, ATAG is much more of a, do you have this feature? Yes or no, and you can tick the box and it records it all for you. It is really nice in that, although it is multi-page, it uses local storage in the browser. So as long as you don't close your browser window, if you just leave that open there, you could do that over several days or a week and have it record for you. Or you could save it and then perhaps edit it later. I quite like it as a first pass. If I was doing a full ATAG audit, I probably wouldn't use it because I would want to include more information about why this is a problem, what you could do to fix it. But if you're not sure if ATAG is right for you, this reporting tool would be a really great place to start, because you could just sort of go through and you're not having to explain it to someone else. You're just making notes for yourself or for your team. Whereas if I'm doing an ATAG audit, I'm there to help educate and explain to the client exactly what's needed. So I would want a bit more detail. But I quite like that tool. I think it's really, really nice.
It is almost like a self-guided checklist, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. And records as you go, so you don't have to keep it all in your memory. Always nice. No one likes to remember anything. And it has links through to the specification. So if you're like, oh, I don't know, you can go through to just that bit and read how that is.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, there doesn't seem to be any questions. One thing I will say, I think I put in the chat, but there's a lot of links being thrown around in chat, especially from people like the amazing Andrew. So we'll gather all of this up, as well as the obviously the YouTube channel coming out, the YouTube movie coming out of this. YouTube movie. We'll also gather all the resources and provide them for anyone that's interested as well, because there's a lot that are really useful links shared.
And it's, I think, something that I am working on and would like to be publishing soon, so people keep an eye out for it, is I would actually like to publish a plain language version of ATAG. I need someone to review it and check that it's accurate, because the last time I tried to use it myself, I found mistakes in it. So Vincent, I'm just seeing the question here. Sorry, Russ, I'm going to take your job.
No, it's all good.
Has there been much industry buy-in to ATAG yet? I would say not as much as I would like, but definitely more than you might think. And I think a lot of the time, people don't want to make a big fuss that they're doing because it's not compulsory. They don't have to say, yes, we comply with ATAG. But I see tools gradually adding features, and I'm like, if I had made a checklist for them based on ATAG, those are exactly the features that I would have asked them to do. So I think there's a lot of it happening internally in product teams. And we've had a couple of audits recently and quite a few more requests for ATAG assessments than we have in the past. So I think there's a building kind of awareness of it. And I think if people here have sort of listened to this today and sort of thought, oh, that's very interesting, but it's not actually relevant to my product, that's cool. At least now you know what it is. And if it comes up in future, or if you know someone who's thinking, oh, we really need a bit more than ATAG, than WCAG, maybe you could say to them, have you looked at ATAG yet? It might be really useful for you.
Well, British has come in chat with an interesting question, which is, how would you use ATAG report in developing VPAC?
That's
Lots of
interesting.
acronyms in there. I think, Bree,
yes.
next time, put extra 3 or 4 acronyms in there.
So a VPAC, for people who aren't aware, is what does it stand for? Voluntary something of
I can't dig you out of this hole. I can never.
I've got nothing. Voluntary product accessibility template. Thank you, David. Much appreciated. It is a way of saying that you comply to WCAG or EN 301. I have forgotten the last 3 digits of the European standard, or Section 508, 504 for the US. And it sits in a specific format so that people who are not aware of accessibility but might be looking at buying a product through their procurement process can compare and see which is the more competing product is more accessible. I would love to see a VPAC format for ATAG. I don't think one has been developed, but I feel like you could do it in the same way as you do, like it's like, well, it satisfies, partially satisfies, doesn't satisfy, not applicable. And you could go through each criteria in that way. I don't know if ASEN 301549 recognizes ATAG. I'm going to actually ask if maybe Andrew knows the answer to that question. I'm only familiar with the European standard through doing VPATs, and I usually sort of translate it from my WCAG to that. So if someone who's more familiar with the European standard wants to talk about that. Yeah, Andrew's answered that to say, yeah, it doesn't recognize ATAG specifically, just WCAG. And I think that's in keeping with the general feeling that WCAG is something that you can require people to do. ATAG is, because it's feature-based and because it is additional to WCAG, it's maybe not something that's going to get legislated or enforced in that hard-edged kind of way.
Well, I think we're coming up to time. Thank you so much, Julie. I learned a lot. I mean, for those who don't know, this began because one night, Julie and I were talking, and she started talking about ATAG, and I said, I know nothing about it. Why don't you do a talk for us? That's the sort of terrible human I am. So thank you so much, Julie. It was amazing. And thank you for everyone attended. Thank you so much for everyone that asked questions.
Oh, Andrew, that's Andrew Norman just said, like, WCAG is how to fix problems. ATAG is how to avoid problems in the first place. I like that a lot, Andrew. That is wonderful.
That'll become our tagline. We're stealing it.
Yeah, doing it now. Sorry, Andrew. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. I hope this has given you a bit of an orientation to ATAG, and it's been quite useful for me to get it out of my head and into the world. So thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.